Found out my husband's secret life. My revenge was brutal. My name is Rebecca, and 6 months ago I discovered that my husband of 10 years wasn't just cheating on me. He was living an entire double life with another woman who thought she was his only girlfriend. But instead of confronting him immediately, I spent 3 months planning the most devastating revenge that would destroy both their lives simultaneously. By the time I was finished, my husband lost his job, his reputation, his apartment with his mistress, and $85,000 of his own money. His girlfriend lost her job, her apartment, and her sanity when she discovered she'd been sleeping with a married man for 2 years. And me? I got everything in our divorce, plus the most satisfying revenge story of all time. This is how I discovered my husband's double life, and made sure both cheaters paid the ultimate price for their deception. 10 years ago I married James Parker, a charming sales manager at a tech company who seemed like everything I wanted in a husband. He was ambitious, well-dressed, social, and apparently devoted to building our life together. We lived in a beautiful 3-bedroom house in Westfield that we bought together 5 years ago. I worked as a graphic designer from my home office, while James traveled frequently for work, often spending 3 or 4 days a week visiting clients in different cities. From the outside, we had the perfect marriage. James was attentive when he was home, always bringing me flowers or small gifts from his business trips. We had regular date nights, took nice vacations, and our friends often commented on how lucky we were to have such a solid relationship. James made good money, around $120,000 a year, and was generous with his spending on our home and lifestyle. He'd recently been promoted to regional sales director, which meant even more travel but also a significant raise. I trusted James completely. In 10 years of marriage, he'd never given me reason to doubt his faithfulness. He was affectionate, communicative, and seemed genuinely happy in our marriage. James's work schedule had always been demanding, but over the past 2 years it had become even more intensive. He'd typically leave on Monday mornings and return Thursday evenings, sometimes staying through Friday if he had important client meetings. His territory covered 3 states, and he had major accounts in Chicago, Milwaukee, and Minneapolis. The company paid for his travel expenses, including hotel stays and rental cars, so his frequent absences seemed completely legitimate. When James was traveling, we'd text throughout the day and talk on the phone every evening. He'd tell me about his client meetings, complain about difficult customers, and share funny stories from the road. He seemed stressed but engaged with his work. I actually felt proud of James's success and dedication. His hard work was paying off financially, and I enjoyed having time alone to focus on my design projects. Our arrangement seemed to work well for both of us. The only thing that occasionally bothered me was how exhausted James seemed when he returned from trips. He'd often sleep late on weekends and seemed emotionally drained. But I attributed this to the stress of constant travel and demanding clients. Looking back, there were small warning signs that I missed or rationalized away. Sometimes James would mention client names or city details that didn't match what he'd told me before. When I'd ask for clarification, he'd say he'd misspoken or that I'd misunderstood. His credit card statements occasionally showed charges from restaurants or stores in cities where he claimed to be working, but at times that didn't match his supposed meeting schedule. Again, he had explanations, delayed flights, rescheduled meetings, or entertainment expenses for clients. James had also become more secretive about his phone and laptop. He'd always been casual about leaving his devices around the house, but recently he'd started taking his phone to the bathroom and closing his laptop whenever I entered his office. When I mentioned these changes, James said his company had implemented new security protocols about confidential client information, so he was being more careful about data protection. About 8 months ago, I started noticing some unusual patterns in our finances. James had always handled most of our banking and investments, claiming he enjoyed managing money and was better at it than I was. I trusted him completely and rarely questioned his financial decisions. But when I was doing our taxes last year, I noticed several large cash withdrawals from our joint savings account, amounts ranging from $2,000 to $5,000, totaling nearly $20,000 over the previous year. When I asked James about these withdrawals, he explained that he'd been making some private investments in business deals that required cash transactions. He said he hadn't wanted to worry me with the details, but the investments were doing well and would pay off soon. I also noticed that James had opened a new credit card that I wasn't listed on. When I asked about it, he said it was specifically for business expenses to make his accounting easier, and that the company reimbursed all charges so it wouldn't affect our personal finances. These explanations seemed reasonable at the time, especially since our household budget remained stable, and James continued contributing his full salary to our joint account. The first crack in James's facade came 6 months ago during what should have been a routine errand. James was supposed to be in Milwaukee for a 3-day client conference. He'd left Monday morning with his usual travel bag and rental car, texting me updates about his flight and arrival at the hotel. On Tuesday afternoon, I was driving to meet a client for a design consultation when I saw a car that looked exactly like James's personal BMW parked outside a high-end apartment complex downtown, about 20 minutes from our house. I almost drove past without thinking about it, but something made me turn around and check the license plate. It was definitely James's car. My first thought was that there must be a logical explanation. Maybe he'd had to return early for some emergency and hadn't had time to tell me yet. Maybe he was meeting a local client at their home. But James had specifically texted me that morning saying he was in back-to-back meetings all day and might not be able to call until evening. Instead of calling James immediately, I decided to wait and see if he volunteered information about being back in town early. That evening, James called me at his usual time, around 8 p.m. He sounded normal and relaxed, telling me about his supposed meetings in Milwaukee and complaining about the hotel's poor Wi-Fi connection. I didn't mention seeing his car, but I started paying much closer attention to inconsistencies in his stories. The next morning, Wednesday, James texted me a photo of his supposed hotel breakfast with a caption about another early morning in Milwaukee. But the timestamp on the photo was 9:30 a.m., and James knew I knew he was always up by 6 a.m. for work. I decided to drive by the apartment complex again Wednesday afternoon. James's car was there again, parked in the same spot. This time, I parked across the street and waited. After about an hour, I saw James exit the building with a woman I'd never seen before. She was petite, blonde, probably in her early 30s and very attractive. James had his arm around her waist, and they were clearly comfortable and familiar with each other. I watched them get into James's car together and drive away. My husband of 10 years was obviously having an affair. Following the evidence. But instead of confronting James immediately, I decided I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. Was this a recent affair, or had it been going on longer? Was it just physical, or was James emotionally involved with this woman? I hired a private investigator named Sandra Mills, who specialized in infidelity cases. Sandra was expensive $150 per hour, but I needed professional documentation of James's activities. What Sandra discovered over the next 2 weeks was far worse than a simple affair. James wasn't just cheating on me, he was living a complete double life. The apartment building where I'd seen him belonged to the woman, whose name was Ashley Morgan. According to public records, she was a 29-year-old marketing coordinator at a pharmaceutical company. But here's the shocking part. Ashley had no idea James was married. Sandra's investigation revealed that James had been telling Ashley he was a divorce sales executive who traveled frequently for work. He'd been staying at Ashley's apartment during his supposed business trips for over 2 years. James had created an entire fictional identity. He told Ashley his ex-wife had taken him for everything in their divorce, which explained why he didn't have his own place yet. He said he was rebuilding his life and saving money to buy a house where they could live together. The private investigator's report was devastating in its thoroughness. James had been maintaining this double life with meticulous planning. He really did travel for work, but he'd been using his business trips as cover to spend time with Ashley. When he claimed to be in Milwaukee or Chicago, he was often actually at Ashley's apartment. When he claimed to be in client meetings, he was often out with Ashley, shopping, dining, or attending events as a couple. Sandra had photographed them together at restaurants, movies, and even a weekend getaway to a bed and breakfast in Vermont that James had told me was a client retreat. The financial investigation was equally shocking. Those mysterious cash withdrawals from our savings? James had been using that money to pay for his relationship with Ashley, expensive dinners, jewelry, weekend trips, and even some of Ashley's rent when she'd had financial difficulties. The separate credit card James had opened was also being used for Ashley-related expenses. The company wasn't reimbursing these charges. James was personally spending thousands of dollars maintaining his relationship with another woman. Over the past 2 years, James had spent approximately $45,000 of our money on his affair. But the most heartbreaking part of Sandra's investigation was what she learned about Ashley's situation. Ashley genuinely believed she was in a committed, exclusive relationship with a divorced man who was working toward building a future with her. She'd been patient with James's financial limitations, understanding about his travel schedule, and supportive of his supposed recovery from a difficult divorce. Ashley had even been helping James save money by covering some of their shared expenses and occasionally lending him money when he claimed his business payments were delayed. She was completely innocent, a victim of James's deception just as much as I was. Sandra had observed Ashley mentioning to friends that she was hoping James would propose soon, and that she was excited about their upcoming move to a larger apartment together. Ashley had no idea she was dating a married man who was stealing money from his wife to fund their relationship. After reviewing Sandra's complete report, I realized I had an opportunity for the most devastating revenge imaginable. I could destroy James's life and simultaneously help Ashley discover the truth about the man she thought she loved. But I needed to be strategic. If I confronted James directly, he might find ways to minimize the damage or manipulate both Ashley and me. I needed a plan that would expose his lies completely and leave him with no way to recover. I decided to spend the next month gathering additional evidence and planning a coordinated exposure that would destroy James's life systematically. First, I secretly copied all of our financial records for the past 3 years. Bank statements, credit card bills, tax returns, investment accounts, everything. I wanted clear documentation of every penny James had stolen from our marriage to fund his affair. I also transferred half of our joint savings to a new account that only I could access. Since James had been stealing our money, I felt justified in protecting what remained. I consulted with a divorce attorney named Patricia Wong, who helped me understand how to protect my assets and document James's financial infidelity for divorce proceedings. Patricia advised me to keep detailed records of James's whereabouts and activities, since his dishonesty about travel expenses might constitute financial fraud that could affect our property settlement. I also spent time learning everything I could about Ashley's life and personality through social media and public information. Ashley's Instagram showed a woman who valued honesty, family, and genuine relationships. She frequently posted about her close relationships with her parents and sister, and often shared quotes about trust and authentic love. She also posted photos that documented her relationship with James, dinners they'd shared, trips they'd taken, and moments that were clearly meaningful to her. Seeing these photos was painful, but they also provided me with evidence of specific dates and activities that I could use to prove James's lies. Most importantly, Ashley's social media presence showed that she was a kind, genuine person who didn't deserve to be deceived. This made me even more determined to expose James's fraud. I decided that the most effective approach would be to reveal James's double life to Ashley and to his employer simultaneously, while documenting everything for the divorce proceedings. Here's the plan I developed. Phase 1. I would approach Ashley privately and show her evidence of James's marriage and deception. This would give her the opportunity to process the information and decide how she wanted to handle the situation. Phase 2. I would coordinate with Ashley to confront James together, forcing him to face both women he'd been deceiving simultaneously. Phase 3. I would report James's fraudulent business expenses to his employer, potentially resulting in his termination for misusing company resources. Phase 4. I would file for divorce with comprehensive evidence of his financial infidelity, ensuring I received favorable terms in the settlement. The beauty of this plan was that each phase would reinforce the others, creating a complete destruction of James's carefully constructed lies. The most delicate part of my plan was approaching Ashley without scaring her away or making her think I was crazy. I decided to write her a letter that included photographic evidence and specific details that would prove I was telling the truth. I spent days crafting the letter, trying to strike the right tone, compassionate toward her, but clear about the evidence against James. The letter began, "Dear Ashley, my name is Rebecca Parker, and I'm writing to share information that will be difficult to hear but that you have a right to know. The man you know as James Parker is my husband of 10 years, and he has been lying to both of us about fundamental aspects of his life. I included copies of our marriage certificate, photos of James and me together throughout our relationship, and bank records showing our shared finances and home ownership. I also included specific details about James's supposed business trips that corresponded to times when Ashley had posted photos with him on social media. The letter concluded with an invitation to meet in person so I could answer any questions and show her additional evidence. I left the letter at Ashley's apartment on a Friday evening when I knew James was supposed to be there with her. I wanted her to have the weekend to process the information before we spoke. Ashley called me Saturday morning. She was crying and sounded completely devastated. "Is this real?" she asked. "Are you really married to James? Because if this is some kind of joke or mistake, it's incredibly cruel." "It's real," I told her gently. "I have 10 years of documentation and I'm happy to show you everything. I know this is shocking and painful, but you deserve to know the truth." We arranged to meet that afternoon at a quiet coffee shop across town. When I met Ashley in person, I could see why James had been attracted to her. She was beautiful, but more than that, she seemed genuinely sweet and vulnerable. She brought printed copies of text messages between her and James, photos they'd taken together, and even receipts from things he'd bought her. "I feel so stupid," she said, looking at the evidence I'd brought. "How could I not know he was married? How could I be so blind?" "You're not stupid," I assured her. "James is a professional liar. He fooled me for months too, even though I've known him for over a decade." Ashley showed me messages where James had talked about his difficult divorce, his ex-wife who had supposedly taken everything, and his dreams of starting fresh with someone who truly loved him. "He said he wanted to marry me," Ashley said, crying. "He said I was the love of his life and that he'd never felt this way about anyone before. He told me the same things when we were dating," I replied. "James is very good at telling people what they want to hear." After we'd shared all our evidence and stories, Ashley and I realized we both wanted to confront James together. "I want him to see that his lies didn't work," Ashley said. "I want him to face both of us at the same time, and try to explain how he justified deceiving everyone who trusted him." We planned the confrontation for the following Thursday evening. James was supposed to be staying at Ashley's apartment after another business trip. Ashley would act normally when James arrived, then I would show up unexpectedly with all our evidence. We also decided to record the confrontation, both for our own protection and to have documentation of James's responses to the allegations. Thursday evening, I waited in my car outside Ashley's apartment building until I saw James arrive. I gave them an hour together, then went upstairs and knocked on the door. Ashley answered the door with tears in her eyes but a determined expression. "James," she called back into the apartment, "there's someone here to see you." When James saw me standing in Ashley's doorway, his face went completely white. "Rebecca? What are you doing here?" "I'm here to meet your girlfriend," I said calmly, walking into the apartment. "Ashley and I have been having very interesting conversations about your travel schedule." James looked back and forth between Ashley and me, clearly trying to figure out how much we knew and what he could possibly say to explain the situation. "I can explain," he started, but Ashley cut him off. "Explain how you've been lying to me for 2 years about being divorced? Explain how you're married and living in a house with your wife while telling me you're staying in hotels? Explain how you've been stealing money from our joint accounts to pay for your affair?" I added. James tried several different approaches: denial, partial admission, blame shifting, and finally desperation. "It's not what it looks like," he said. "Rebecca and I have been having problems for years. We're basically separated, just living in the same house for financial reasons." "That's interesting," I replied, "because you took me to dinner for our anniversary 3 months ago and told me how much you loved me. And you told me last week that you wanted to move in together and start planning our wedding," Ashley added. As James realized he couldn't lie his way out of the situation, he began to break down emotionally. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, crying. "I love both of you. I just didn't know how to choose." "You didn't have to choose," I said. "You had to be honest. You had to not lie to 2 women for years while stealing money to fund your double life." Ashley was disgusted. "You made me an accomplice to your affair without my knowledge. You made me help you cheat on your wife. You stole money from her to buy me gifts. How many other women are there?" I asked. "If you're willing to maintain one affair for 2 years, how do we know Ashley is the only one?" James swore that Ashley was the only other relationship, but at that point, neither of us believed anything he said. The confrontation lasted about 2 hours, with James alternating between apologies, excuses, and desperate attempts to salvage one or both relationships. But Ashley and I had already decided we were done with him. After the confrontation, Ashley and I worked together to ensure James faced consequences for his actions. We'd both been victims of his deception, and we wanted justice. The first step was exposing James's fraudulent business expenses to his employer. I compiled evidence showing that James had claimed company reimbursements for personal expenses related to his affair, hotel stays where he was actually at Ashley's apartment, restaurant charges for romantic dinners, and travel expenses for trips that were partially personal. The evidence was clear and comprehensive. James had essentially been stealing from his company while using his work travel as cover for his affair. I sent the documentation to James's supervisor and HR department with a detailed explanation of the fraudulent expenses. The company's response was swift. James was terminated within 48 hours for expense fraud and violation of company ethics policies. His termination was classified as for cause, which meant he wasn't eligible for severance pay or unemployment benefits. Losing his job also meant losing his company car, his health insurance, and his professional reputation in the industry. The financial consequences. Meanwhile, I proceeded with divorce proceedings using the comprehensive evidence of James's financial infidelity. My attorney Patricia Wong was able to demonstrate that James had stolen approximately $45,000 from our marriage to fund his affair, and that he'd been systematically deceiving me about our finances. Under our state's laws, financial infidelity during marriage significantly affects property division and divorce proceedings. I was awarded the house, 75% of our remaining savings, James's retirement accounts, and significant alimony payments. James was also ordered to reimburse me for the stolen funds, plus interest and legal fees. The financial judgment meant that James would be paying me approximately $3,000 per month for the next 5 years, while having no claim to our shared assets. Ashley handled her own revenge against James with impressive creativity. She discovered that James had been using her as a reference for several business deals and personal loans, claiming she was his girlfriend and could vouch for his character. Ashley contacted everyone James had listed her as a reference for and explained the true situation, that she'd unknowingly been dating a married man who had lied about his financial situation. This destroyed several business relationships and potential opportunities that James had been cultivating. Ashley also ensured that their mutual friends and her social circle knew the truth about James's deception. Since James had been integrated into Ashley's friend group and had attended social events with her, his reputation in her community was completely destroyed. The social fallout for James was extensive and lasting. Once news of the affair and financial fraud spread through our community, James became a social pariah. Our mutual friends were disgusted by his behavior, especially the systematic nature of his lies and the financial theft involved. James's family was equally horrified. His parents, who had always been proud of his supposed success in stable marriage, were humiliated by the scandal. His sister, who had considered me family, cut off contact with James entirely and sent me a heartfelt apology for her brother's behavior. James was forced to move back in with his parents at age 35, unemployed and financially devastated. While James's life fell apart, I found myself in the best position I'd been in for years. Without the financial drain of James's secret expenses, I was able to expand my graphic design business significantly. I also discovered that I enjoyed living alone and making decisions without having to consider a partner who had been systematically lying to me. The house felt peaceful for the first time in years. I redecorated James's office as a proper studio for my design work and created the creative space I'd always wanted. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I started dating again. But this time I was much more careful about red flags and much more protective of my independence and financial security. Ashley and I maintained a friendship after everything was settled. She'd been as much a victim of James's deception as I had been. She took some time to recover emotionally from the betrayal, but eventually started dating again as well. At least now I know what real lies look like, she told me. James was so convincing that I'll never again ignore red flags or make excuses for inconsistent behavior. Ashley also used the experience to become more financially independent. She'd learned that James had been subtly manipulating her finances as well, and she was determined never to be vulnerable to that kind of deception again. 6 months after our confrontation, I heard through mutual acquaintances that James was still living with his parents, working a low-paying retail job, and struggling to make his alimony payments. He tried to date several women, but word of his deception had spread enough that most people in our area knew about his double life. James had also attempted to reconcile with both Ashley and me at different times, but neither of us was interested in giving him another opportunity to lie and manipulate. The last I heard, James was considering moving to another state to start fresh. but his financial obligations to me made that difficult. Meanwhile, my design business was thriving. I'd paid off the house completely, and I was in a healthy relationship with someone who valued honesty and genuine partnership. The experience taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't something you plan. It's simply refusing to enable someone's lies and making sure they face the natural consequences of their choices. James destroyed his own life with his greed and deception. Ashley and I just made sure he couldn't cover up the damage or escape accountability. And honestly, watching him face the reality of what he'd thrown away for a fantasy life was more satisfying than any revenge I could have planned.